Hello all and welcome to RiskOut's first webinar of 2025, Trump, Banks, and BSA. What's next for financial crime compliance? We are so excited to have you joining us today. Thank you for taking a little bit of time and learning with us. Now, before we do dive into today's content, we should run through some quick housekeeping items. RiskOut will be sharing all of today's webinar resources, including these slides, handouts, and recording in a follow-up email tomorrow morning, so be sure to keep an eye on your inbox. We also want this session to be as valuable for you as possible, so we encourage you to ask any questions that you may have throughout today's session in the questions section of the webinar panel on the side of your screen. If we're unable to answer your question live on today's call, no worries, we will be sure to follow up with you afterwards with one of our experts to reach out to you directly. We'll also be running a few polls throughout today's webinar session to better understand you all, our audience, and your participation is greatly appreciated. Now, in case it's your first time joining us, RiskOut is a team of former bank examiners, BSA professionals, and fintech developers, helping financial institutions grow and be more efficient and profitable. Through a full BSA AML suite and specialized market tools, RiskOut solutions increase revenue and decrease your compliance burden by unlocking new deposit streams and automating compliance workflows. We are funded and influenced by over 200 financial institutions through networks like Castle Creek, the Bankers Helping Bankers Fund, and Alloy Labs, and we're proud that 100% of our customers are referenceable. If you're interested in learning more about how we help community banks and credit unions every day, visit riskout.com and get in touch with us. Last week, RiskOut shared the feedback that we've received from our customers about our all-new comprehensive BSA AML solution. Our team has been working tirelessly to develop innovative and intuitive ways to solve common industry challenges, and I'm so excited to share that the results are in. With quotes like, "I cannot begin to calculate how many hours of work RiskOut has saved me," and "I wish I had this sooner," we are thrilled to be taking the BS out of BSA and helping community bankers across the nation. If you'd like to see how RiskOut can replace your current BSA solution and help improve your efficiency and effectiveness, you can request a demo at riskout.com or by answering the demo question in the post-webinar survey following this session. Next month, RiskOut will be hosting a panel webinar with customers of ours that are leveraging our BSA AML solution to improve their operations. With community bankers with titles ranging from BSA officer to CEO and institutions with sizes ranging from under $100 million in assets to over $2 billion in assets, you can hear what made your peers look for a new solution, why they chose RiskOut, and what they think about the platform. If you want to hear bankers' thoughts about this new BSA solution and get a no-commitment look at our powerful features, check out our resources on riskout.com and save your seat today. Today's webinar will be led by none other than Kristen Parker, RiskOut's Vice President of Compliance and Operations, and Ryan McInerney, RiskOut's Vice President of Product Strategy. Kristen is a seasoned expert in BSA, AML, and fraud prevention with extensive experience building and implementing monitoring programs for higher risk industries. She has contributed to significant updates in the FFIEC manual, provided practical and risk-based AML guidance at industry events, and played a key role in the development of RiskOut's innovative and actionable BSA solutions. Recognized by her peers as PBC's Compliance Person of the Year, Kristen continues to champion efficient, technology-driven approaches that empower financial institutions to confidently manage regulatory requirements. Ryan leverages his extensive regulatory and technical background to create software solutions that solve critical industry problems. Before joining RiskOut, Ryan served as a national bank examiner at the OCC, where he was a key member of the Northeast District Committees for Compliance and Commercial Credit, working to address challenges facing community banks. We are very excited and fortunate to have them both joining us here today. And without further ado, I will go ahead and pass the baton over to Kristen to dive into today's content. Kristen, take it away.
Howdy, everyone. Good to be here with you. Good to see you, Ryan. I'm always always excited to do webinars with you. I thought we'd start this out just a wee bit differently than we normally do. So if Ethan, you will escort us into the next slide. We are in a state of a lot of information being thrown at us over the last, year or so, and more so over the last month. We have so much that we read, and then it changes the next day, and so on and so forth. And it's just very overwhelming to have to deal with. So I've said, let's start this webinar a little bit differently, and just everybody stop what you're doing, stop your typing, look at the camera, and let's all just take a nice big deep breath together, in and out. We're about self-care at Risk Out. We try to help our people sleep better at night. And if we can't help you do that, we can at least let you have 15 seconds to yourself to just practice a little bit of self-care. So Ethan, with that said, this is exactly why you needed a deep breath, isn't it? There are headlines everywhere about the new administration and everybody involved in it. We are seeing these headlines popping up multiple times a day. We're seeing different stories. Every time I wake up, I'm reading different stories. I think it's important that we set the stage and say, when we started out saying we wanted to do this webinar, we spent a lot of time researching it. And that was challenging in its own way, because what was true today, when you're researching it, wasn't necessarily true tomorrow. So what you're seeing today and laying the groundwork for you is a ton of work that went into researching all of this and keeping it as up to date as possible. Even as of this morning, getting in there and updating things that had changed, that somebody said one thing and now all of a sudden that thing is no longer true. So just know that everything we're going through today is true as of today. We're just going to be telling you facts of what we know, what we've learned, what we've researched, what we've heard from our own industry experts that work in these areas. And our goal is to just cut through the noise and really focus on things that are pertinent to banking, your role, give you an action plan for potential steps that need to be taken next, and considerations. Each of these things we're going to go through, we're going to talk about how it impacts you and action items for it. So with that said, let's get on.
All right, y'all, that brings us to our first poll question, which you should see popping up on your screen now. These poll questions are, of course, optional, but we'd love to hear from our audience. This question asks, how confident are you that your institution is prepared for potential regulatory changes? Got 4 options here. Could be anywhere from very confident to not confident, or maybe you're the 4th option and you're just unsure. You're waiting to see what happens first. We'll give y'all a couple of seconds to get your responses in, and then Ryan and Kristen, I'd love to kind of hear what y'all think about the responses that we've got from our audience today. Excellent. Y'all are quick on the mouse and keyboard today. We've got a bunch of responses in very quickly. If we turn those around, you can see, I think those results are popping up on your screen now. You can see that 1/4 of our audience today says that they are very confident, ready for anything. I love that confidence and enthusiasm. The majority of our audience is sitting kind of in that middle section, saying they're somewhat confident. Only 7% is not confident, 15% is unsure, kind of biding their time, waiting to see what happens. Ryan, let me kick this over to you. I know with the OCC, you talk to institutions all the time. How does it stack up to what you were expecting to see from this audience?
Yeah, I think this makes total sense. I think there are some situations where you get into and, it can be difficult to have the amount of staffing you need, and that staffing is really important for keeping up to date in the regulations, because you got to keep your head above water just with the blocking and tackling day to day. If you don't have that, then it's hard to say, okay, well, what's happening here? How do I prepare for a change here and there? So sometimes that does get in the way. And then for the majority of responses, which is we feel confident, but we're agile, I think that's the best place to be, because especially right now where things are changing relatively quickly, if you're too rigid in your plan, that's going to be difficult to change and make sure you're meeting the regulations that might be being updated.
All righty, excellent. Well, we've actually got a second poll question for you coming immediately after that. That's coming up and asking you right now, what you see as your biggest compliance challenge. We're going to be talking about a lot of things today. You can select as many or as few of these as possible, but we want to get a feel for y'all. What are you most concerned about? What's keeping you up at night? What are the things that, as you're seeing these executive orders, new legislations passing, what's jumping off the page to you as something that you've got to keep top of mind? We'll give you all a couple more seconds to get these responses in. Again, you can select as many or as few of these responses as possible, just to give us an idea of where your head's at today. Excellent, excellent. I can see that a lot of people are selecting multiple things, which of course can mean that we've got a lot on our minds. While we turn these results around, and Kristen, I might pose this question to you. You can see that the #1 item is keeping up with fraud and emerging financial crimes. We know that this has been on the rise in the past. That's followed not too far behind by almost half of our audience being concerned about those increasing regulatory expectations. Little over a third being challenged with limited resources and staffing. Other two, the smaller options, are reducing false positives and transaction monitoring, and then preparing for exam and audit scrutiny. Kristen, does this surprise you at all?
No, I talk to banks multiple times a day, every day a week. Last year, we spent time in the ICBA's Tech Accelerator and then FIS's Tech Accelerator. So we got exposed to a lot of conversations in addition to just normal banks and credit unions reaching out. Fraud was a big concern for them. And on top of that, they're worried about exams changing, because what we heard the theme happening last year was my exams that I went through last year, BSA wise and other, were extremely different than what they used to be. More scrutinizing on the BSA, even at the tiniest of institutions. So I think that just shows that you're warranted to worry about that, because it has changed. It is changing to scrutinize. I was actually on my way dropping my daughter off at school this morning, and I was thinking to myself, I can't believe I'm thinking about, when it comes to fraud, check fraud and crypto fraud in the same realm in 2025. It's just wild to me just how far spread out fraud is on just, such an old school tool like a check, and then new school tool like crypto.
All right, so we're starting to dive right into it. One of the first things that we saw just with changes that the Trump administration has been making is labeling these cartels and different kind of drug organizations as terrorist organizations. On the surface, that might not seem like it's that related to banking, but it does actually give you a little bit more bandwidth in your monitoring and your ability to report on some of these individuals or entities. Because now if they're qualifying for terrorist financing, you're looking for slightly different patterns. You might be looking for if there's something more out of character with the individual, rather than you think they're actually laundering money. Because a lot of times with terrorist financing, you're seeing potentially legitimately derived funds put into some sort of organization that is a terrorist organization. So even if you see legitimately derived funds going into some of these accounts, that's reportable at this point. So just something to keep in mind, that the red flags of terrorist financing. And if you do see any of that sort of stuff happening, that is eligible for reporting on any of these potential cartel entities or individuals. Kristen, do you have anything to add on that?
No, I mean, these names should also be included in your latest lists that you're seeing from an OFAC perspective as well. So, we did see one of our institutions have some results with potential name matches through there. So you might want to just check. It's always a best practice to check to make sure that your BSA provider, or whoever you're using for OFAC scanning, is actually using the latest and greatest list. That's something my examiners used to ask me. How do I know that they are using the latest and greatest? They should have some methodology behind being able to prove to you that they are. So just an encouragement, because it may be asked. Tariffs, the big T word, happening this weekend, supposedly, either this weekend or the first of next week, according to Trump, as of this morning. Now, remember, that may not be true tomorrow, but it's important to really take into consideration. There's a lot to talk about with tariffs in this regards. In regards to banking, there is really a lot of concerns that has been brought up from varying different perspectives. Just the fact that, you know, what we've put here for you, which is if it could cause a big burden on some of your commercial clients that do rely on, you know, foreign and international trade to operate their business. If things are getting more expensive, it may make them paying you back harder, right? If they're not passing, they ultimately will pass that cost along to us consumers. But in the meantime, as they adjust and make changes, or maybe if they do pass those fees along to us consumers, maybe we cut back on what we're spending. So if that's the case and they're not getting the income that they used to, or their income is cut, there are risks for higher credit risks involved in that. Another concern are ag banks, right? So tariffs have effects on agriculture. Not only do tariffs have effects on agriculture, but the immigration laws that Trump has put into play, and the deportation and the threat in communities that really rely on those foreign workers to do jobs that are necessary to run their farm, are seeing major problems already with their ability to keep up with, you know, if their workers aren't coming to work, how are they going to farm their farm? And so there's concerns over not just from a worker perspective, but also if their equipment you know, becomes more expensive, or you know, there's a good example of if you remember, I can't remember exactly what year, but there was a trade war essentially going on with China, where they stopped buying 75% of our soybeans that they used to, and that had a significant impact on the farmers. So if you're an ag bank, there are some things to consider from not just a tariff perspective, but from an immigration law perspective, and really considering and taking those into your risk assessment and understanding if you guys, you know, what steps you need to take to better protect yourself. There are looming concerns that the tariffs are going to cause some inflation, which would cause interest rate hikes. That is always a problem for any consumer, right, or any business. And so if that's the case, that could make it harder for them to pay back as well. That goes back to the lending risks. Ryan, do you have anything to add on to that?
Yeah, I'd say a couple areas where you might be able to take specific action just to determine where the risk might be in your portfolio is if you do any sort of net operating income stresses on your commercial borrowers, maybe taking any of those that push into a more worrisome category, like maybe you would expect them to be in watch or special mention based on X move in their NOI. It might be worth checking in on them and seeing if they're affected by the tariffs. Therefore, you'd have a better idea if they're going to transition that direction. The other space that might be good for stress testing could be either liquidity planning or interest rate risk planning. If you want to do any kind of niche scenarios just around this factor and other factors just generally due to political turmoil, you could build scenarios for that just to see what the changes might be and where you want to focus.
I did read some really good article this morning talking about the different states that have concentrations of that rely more, their economy relies more on that international trade. And so some states will be more affected than others when it comes to this. So, you know, if you want to reach out, and I can send you guys that article, it'll tell you if there's a concentration. There are some states that there is a strict, really big, like talking over 90% of the concentration of the economy is on trade and international, and they will be affected by it. Border states are another good example of that, because Ethan and I were discussing just yesterday an article that was talking about how some of these border states to Canada, some of their supplies ends up passing back, over back and forth about 17 times before the product's completely finished. If you're getting tariff every time that happens, what's the likelihood of you being able to stay in business, or anybody being able to afford what you are actually producing? So those are some serious considerations to take into place.
Yeah, and that's a typical thing for regulators to check out too. On the liquidity risk management, we would always look for potential concentrations, whether that was an employer or an industry or anything that might affect the viability of the institution in that way.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we've talked about tariffs and drug cartels so far. We're going to move into one of some of the major headlines which have been some of those regulatory agencies. But before we get there, we've got a poll question for you. Now, we know in 2024, it was a landmark year for enforcement actions of all natures. We saw some of the highest penalties that we've ever seen, seeing some of the highest quantities that we've ever seen as well, with a steady upward trend. So we're curious, do you expect enforcement actions to increase, decrease, or stay the same under the Trump administration? So you can answer any of those three options: increase, decrease, stay the same. Would love to hear what y'all's thoughts are based on what we've seen so far in this first month of the admin. Excellent. I'll give y'all just a couple more seconds to get these responses in. Look like we already got most folks that have shared their 2 cents. All right, excellent. Let's turn these results around. It looks like we've got a pretty even split here, a little bit more than I was expecting. Just under half of our audience expects a decrease in enforcement actions this year compared to last year. About 20% said they expect to stay the same, so we had very high numbers last year, and then 32% thinks that we'll continue to see this upward trend of an increasing amount of enforcement actions. Ryan, I know you're a former regulator. What do you think? What's your take?
I think there's a lot of things here that will affect whether or not it does stay the same or decrease. I think it probably will stay the same or decrease, particularly if the CFPB doesn't have as much kind of power as it did in the past. So even if, say, enforcement actions of the OCC, the Fed, FDIC, those stay at the same levels, just reducing an entire agency of enforcement actions should reduce the overall amount. I don't know how much that'll affect community institutions, given the CFPB is really more focused on 10 billion and above. So don't think it'll be much change for us in terms of how we need to work and what we're paying attention to and complying with laws and regulations, but overall number will probably decrease a little bit.
Well said. And I think that brings us into the CFPB. Ryan, do you want to tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we've probably all seen this in the news. CFPB is definitely under fire by the Trump administration. And so what that'll lead to is reduced staffing for a lot of the alphabet regulations, any sort of those consumer regulations. The way this is organized for regulators is typically CFPB is focusing on banks banks and credit unions, 10 billion and over. Underneath that, target exams are conducted by NCUA, Fed, FDIC, OCC, and state examiners. CFPB will typically look at some of that sampling, and if they see anything that looks out of whack, they might do a target examination at that financial institution. Even if CFPB were to totally disappear, prior to their creation, these rules, laws, regulations were still being reviewed by the prudential regulator that was at that institution in the first place. So if you're a community bank, you're probably not seeing too much of a difference. And if you're a larger bank, you're seeing a little bit less work just around those alphabet regs in terms of regulatory scrutiny. But it doesn't change the responsibilities of any financial institution around those laws and regulations. Kristen, do you have anything there?
No, you covered it. I think we just go right into the OCC here. So Rodney Hood just was appointed as the head of the OCC. Rodney Hood is a friend of Riskout. Ryan, actually back when he was at the NCUA, not Ryan, and when Rodney Hood was at the NCUA, Ryan was invited by Rodney to come out and speak to their regulators and kind of educate them on some of the stuff we were seeing out in the field as a vendor. So we've gotten to know him and his kind of approach over the years. He actually came out with his priorities over the last week or so. He really thinks that his focus is going to be on not a one-size-fits-all approach anymore for institutions when it comes to their regulatory exams. It's targeting more of what are the risks of that institution. That's fair because holding, every institution's its own snowflake, right? Everybody has their own varying risks on the products they offer, the services they offer, who their target market is, so on and so forth. It's just the same as us saying in BSA, you can't blanket statement saying that this one BSA program works for everybody. That's not the case, right? You know, so he is also adamant, though, that there needs to be strengthening in the institutions over BSA. So to our, you know, our interpretation and our understanding in Ryan's time at the OCC, you know, there will not be any lax in what they're looking for at BS. And when they come to do your exam, you're going to remember that your BSA exam feeds up into the Campbell's rating under management, right? So it's still an integral part, and that's not going to change. I did read right before I got on here, I was reading where, you know, the CEOs of the big banks like the Brian Moynihan and of Bank of America and the Chase Bank are over there and speaking to Congress and saying how, you know, they want looser AML rules. Well, that's really sweet of them to say at Bank of America because they just got a cease and desist order. So of course they'd be arguing for laxer rules when it comes to AML. But that doesn't seem like that's going to end up being the case, right? You know, there's room definitely for improvement in some areas of BSA when it comes to, we'll talk more about that in a minute, but from his kind of directive from that side is there's nothing changing in BSA, and in fact, it's you know, it's going to be a even not bigger focus, but a more targeted focus to make sure that, you know, you, based on the risks your institution represents, that you really should have your program dialed into that. Also, I don't know if anybody saw over the weekend-ish timeframe, 76 OCC examiners were fired. Those were all trainees in the field, so that's going to be interesting to watch how that pans out with people who do retire, who's going to come in. It kind of worries me in a way that it's just like, I don't know how many are on, maybe you can answer this, Ryan, how many are approaching that retirement age time frame, who's going to come in and be trained. Are you going to get the new kid on the block who's just kind of a bully, or who doesn't really know much about BSA but is trying to tell you what to do, or, you know, how all that's going to work? But I'm sure things will shake out over time. Ryan, you probably got some color to add here, being that you are a seasoned OCC fella.
Yeah, I'd say a lot of there was a large bubble of retirements, probably about 10 to 7 years ago. You saw a lot of that, and you saw a lot of hiring in line with that. I can't speak to how many are coming up, but just from my time there, how many were happening at that point and how many people we had to hire to offset it, seemed like that was kind of a point in time bubble. There's still going to be retirements and changes within the organization, but I don't know or don't think that it's a majority of the agency by any means.
How many people do the OCC employ?
I believe, I want to say 3,000, 3,500, but that could be wrong.
So 76 compared to that, maybe that's not the end of the world. But
every year, the OCC will hire one class of trainees, potentially two. They go on for a 6-month training program typically, and then they have a 6-month probationary period after that. So all of those individuals that were fired within that 1-year probationary period when you started the agency.
Yeah, and that was all really, frankly, to be in line with what the rest of the Trump administration is doing. It was just firing people here and there in varying capacities.
And it's good to remember the OCC is a independent agency within the government. So a lot of the directives that you might hear that go over different agencies typically don't apply. And usually when things like this are happening, it's kind of a show of good faith by the comptroller to say, yeah, we support what your administration's initiatives are, we'll match the spirit of that. But for example, when there are government shutdowns, that doesn't affect the OCC. And that typically holds true for a lot of other government directives.
And we tend to focus on the OCC, not just because, not because you worked there, but simply because they set the trend of the tone of what the rest of the regulatory agencies are going to end up following, essentially.
Yeah. All right. So Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So this was paused for 180 days. If you saw any articles on it, you probably thought the sky was falling down because people thought that this was getting just totally tore out and not touched ever again. The reason for this is they wanted to take a 180-day pause, reevaluate the regulation, and then likely make changes to it. what those will end up being, we'll see. But it does potentially open up different businesses, government entities to potentially more bribery, or at least them thinking potentially that they can get away with things during this period. What you should know is that bribery and corruption remain a specified unlawful activity underneath the regulation. So those still qualify as a reportable offense that could be a predicate offense to money laundering. So if you are seeing any of that just because the Corrupt Practices Act is paused, it is still something that is reportable for SARS. So that shouldn't really make any difference with your monitoring or your reporting, but maybe just keeping an eye out that potentially people think they can get away with more stuff here right now. Kristen, do you have anything else on that?
No, you handled it. I'm gonna let you handle crypto too, bud.
All right. That's so weird. When it comes to crypto, it seems like the administration is a little bit friendlier towards crypto. I mean, let's look at Doge is literally named after a cryptocurrency. And so some of the directives that former administrations might have had around crypto that had led, say, the SEC or other organizations to press it a little bit harder, I think they've been told to back off a little bit. And so you'll see that the SEC just closed a suit that was for Robinhood, another one for Coinbase. And all of those relate to the classification of crypto as an asset or whether it's not classified as an asset. I think the biggest things to keep in mind here is just maybe consider increasing your familiarity around crypto. We had actually seen when I was at OCC, some community banks had started mining crypto in the basement just so they understood what was going on with it. Trying to understand how the blockchain worked, maybe what they need to be taking a look for. And one of the biggest things to take a look at just from a monitoring perspective is really the exchanges that cryptocurrency is going through. So we had, I don't remember if it was a webinar, maybe a group speaking topic at a conference, but we were talking with one of the leads at the FBI that oversaw crypto monitoring. And what he had explained to us is that a lot of times you'll see these bad actors spin up an exchange and then they'll pump money or crypto through that exchange without providing beneficial ownership information or other requirements for AML or BSA. So keeping an eye on those sanctioned entities, whether that's a sanctioned exchange or potentially an exchange that isn't well known, those can be pretty good indicators of money laundering. One example of that, if anyone has heard of it, was Tornado Cash. So the idea behind Tornado Cash was literally just to obscure the identity of persons that put crypto into it. And you see a lot of those start to pop up. So keeping an eye on the sanction lists and any other watch list that might identify bad actors in the space can be a really good way to avoid loss here. But then generally understanding of crypto, I think it's huge just to have an idea of what it does and how it works.
Yeah, and your average Joe customer, if they're dealing with a little bit of crypto here and there, they're not a criminal. I mean, we run into institutions. I get that question a lot. It was like, is I gonna have to file SAR because they're dealing with cryptocurrency? It's like, no, it doesn't work like that. It's not that suspicious. Yeah. Like, is it normal? You know, if they're just casually dealing in it, it's the concerns over these exchanges that are the most kind of glaring issue that we see most institutions run into.
Yeah, we received a lot of questions about keyword monitoring for crypto. So I think this was a webinar we did a few years ago with was one of our partners, but they were talking about how they can say, oh yeah, we can look for if the keyword is Robinhood or it's Coinbase or something else, we can give you an idea of how much money is moving through your institution related to crypto. It seems like some people took that idea of taking that keyword monitoring just to get an idea of volume and then applied that to BSA. I don't know how helpful it's going to be if you flag every Robinhood transaction or every Coinbase transaction, because typically those are the more reputable exchanges. The larger issues would probably be with exchanges that are off of the well-known brand name exchange activity.
Yep. Okay, we're going to talk about elephant in the room, Project 2025. Folks didn't seem to know that this existed during the election, and it was actually written in 2022. And it's been something the conservative movement has been trying to push into. It's somewhere close to at least over 700 pages of documentation talking about every single department and what needs to change with it, should it be eliminated, why there's a problem with it, so on and so forth. We did not want to go through all of Product 2025. No thanks. We're talking about the Department of Treasury section that's relevant to banking. And so there's about 15 mandates involved with Project 2025 in regards to the Department of Treasury. I think it should not be lost on anybody that Trump claimed to have no association with Project 2025, said he never read it, which actually I don't think he probably would have read it. Somebody would have told him what it said. But, it has actually been the playbook that they've been following. And so for them to say that that was not our plan to follow this, and now 34% of the entirety of the book has been, the objectives have been completed. Now, those are things related, the 34%, the fast actions in the month were things related to executive orders around DEI and those things that just really probably couldn't be challenged as well within the court of law. But I think it's important to put into perspective that there is also somebody who co-authored this Project 2025 that is now part of the administration as well. So I think, it's not a scare tactic to say that, or we're trying to say that everything that's in here is going to happen. In fact, a lot of what's been passed is already in court and being fought, right? Not that they'll listen, but that's a different story. There are 3 out of the 15 objectives for the Department of Treasury section that have been completed. So the DEI section, the withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, and the rescinding of order from Biden that was around directing the evaluation of climate-related financial risk. So those are completed. There are 2 that are in progress here. One a huge one, which was in the middle of tax season. Part of the objective was to shrink the IRS, and so in the middle of tax season, they fired 6,000 IRS workers. So that has been completed and is still in progress too. And then there are 10 that are not yet started. Ryan will touch on the stuff here in a minute that's related to the Dodd-Frank Act, but there are a couple of ones I think that are important for you guys, which is AML and Beneficial Ownership Corporate Transparency Act, which we'll talk more about that in a minute too. The AML stuff that's related to here and within the here is not an elimination of AML at all. It is simply more of an evaluation, right? Not an evaluation. It doesn't even state in other areas of Project 2025, they say an evaluation to eliminate and for then the elimination of things like the Department of Education, for an example. We feel like there could be some reform here. They do call it an important part of protecting the United States, but they are asking that FinCEN could start back. They used to report, then they pulled back on reporting out the SARs, the effectiveness of the SARs, how many CTRs are filed, so on and so forth. This kind of aligns a little bit with what Rodney was saying, Rodney Hood at OCC, where he's, saying there could be some changes in the reporting dollar threshold just because of inflation, which does make sense, right? For me, if anybody wants to ask my opinion, if you would stop making us file SARs on cannabis related businesses who haven't done anything illegal, then we would save a lot of money in the space alone that way. But there is a report that is going to need to be written every year for the evaluation of the effectiveness of the program. Do we believe that it will be dissolved? No, because they would have stated that that's what they wanted to do, frankly, because that's their MO. But it's also tied up in something called the U.S. Patriot Act. A lot of this is, and to eliminate something associated with the word patriot doesn't seem on brand with them either. So anything to add to that, Ryan?
I think honestly with the FinCEN evaluation and the request for reporting, I think probably most of us in this call have talked about this in the past where the limits haven't been revised in a really long time. And with inflation and changes in the economy, they're probably lower than they should be. Like the CTR threshold at $10,000 might be lower than it should be. So one positive potentially out of this is after evaluating how many CTRs, how many SARs, their efficacy, potential revisions to any of those minimums. So could be a good thing out of that. A lot of other changes there, a lot of things to monitor, but it doesn't seem like AML, BSA is going anywhere, just really a reevaluation of limits and potential execution on some of those. Okay, Dodd-Frank. There's a couple areas that they called out within the mandate for leadership on Dodd-Frank. So this isn't necessarily something that we know is going to happen, but to Kristen's point, a lot of what's been happening in that book, which is, I looked it up, is 922 pages. So enjoy that light reading. A lot of things that are happening in there are happening, So this could potentially be one of those. The line specifically said Congress should repeal Title I, Title II, Title VIII of Dodd-Frank. I did add and Section 1071 in there because that was in a different part of the mandate. They talk about Section 1071 specifically. So potential impact on you could be an ease in reporting on small business data. So there's a lot of information at small business account opening, particularly for lending, where you're providing information similar to how you would maybe on HMDA. With that, we might see a reprieve in how much information financial institutions have to report on small businesses to the federal government. The second ask that they had in there was they wanted a better definition of UDAP. So unfair, deceptive, abusive acts and practices. Even when I was at the agency, there was a little bit of grief about, well, what's the definition of abusive? Well, what's the definition of this? What's the definition of that? And as with a lot of regulations, that can be up to the interpretation of the examiner. I think there's been some frustration within the industry generally about, well, can you just tell me what I need to do so I don't do it? And usually the regulators take is, well, that's too prescriptive. It'll be too easy to get around. We want kind of that bandwidth here at the same time. So it seems like the intention, if this portion was to be executed, would be to better define UDAP and give you guys some better guardrails about what you can and can't do in that space. For the other sections, when we look at Title I, II, and VIII, Title I is primarily around stress testing. It's also about the living wills that you'll see in financial institutions. Dodd-Frank identified, whether we like it or not, systemically important financial institutions. And their biggest complaint with that is being systemically important might also indicate too big to fail. And then there's a lot of grief within this document about not wanting that, not wanting to have to just provide bailouts no matter what if this institution was to go down. And so it seems like there's a lot of attempted removal of that kind of action. One of the pieces in Title I in that stress testing, those are tests for was financial institutions over $50 billion. Now it's just, I believe, the ones that are designated as systemically important financial institutions. Those tests, I think there's pros and cons to them. On the pro, you're getting a better idea of what the balance sheet looks like at these larger financial institutions and the potential impact it can have. A negative is when you give a financial institution one specific stress test or one or two specific stress tests, they build their balance sheet to combat against that specific stress test rather than any potential stress. So it can over narrow what we prepare for and leave us exposed to different stress scenarios. A lot of pros, a lot of cons there. I mean, the Dodd-Frank is a massive act, so I'm not going to go through the whole thing and make everyone fall asleep, but potential loss of stress testing, potential better definition of UDAP, and potential reduction in reporting on small business data. Kristen, anything to add there? I know I probably beat that to death.
Oh, no, I don't want to talk about Dodd-Frank anymore. It's too much. It's too much. Okay, BOI is back. Okay, the Corporate Transparency Act was passed. I don't know. Time is a blur anymore. within the last couple of years. And then it was challenged in a Texas court. It was put on pause, and then it was actually put back into place within the last month or two. This does not change your obligations. If it were to go back on pause again and then be reinstated, this wish-washiness doesn't affect you guys. You still have to do your own beneficial ownership work. This does, if this were to get challenged again or get thrown out, that does not negate your obligations to collect beneficial ownership information. I'm hearing some of my institutions have problems with their staffing who say, it's paused, I don't have to do beneficial owner with my customers anymore. That's not how that works. And the ones that, on the opposite side, they're saying, I don't want to fill out the ones who have reported on it, I don't want to fill out your form. I already submitted this form to FinCEN, just take this form. Well, the form that is printed out doesn't have a tax ID number on it. So that's not acceptable because we have to collect that information on the beneficial ownership form. So there's some challenges that are being kind of like internal struggles that are happening between people saying, you're making me do stuff that I'm not supposed to do or I don't have to do. Well, that's not true anymore, or it wasn't true to begin with. This does not affect your operations at all. It affects your customers that have to report into FinCEN. But it's not your job to go police that. It's not your job to go make sure that they did do that. It's your job to make sure that your processes are followed for beneficial ownership as you have them written and they're being fulfilled successfully. We have a good webinar on this whole Corporate Transparency Act that you can find on our YouTube channel. I think that would be beneficial for people who are wondering, well, what does it mean? And why did everybody make a big deal about it if it didn't affect what I was doing in banking? It's still good for you to know what your customers are having to do just to make sure. And there may be other risks that may be involved if they aren't following it, maybe from a lending perspective or other perspectives outside of just traditional, deposit relationship banking. But Ryan, do you have anything to add there?
No, I think you nailed it. It's important to know these are two separate requirements, and ours hasn't changed yet. The hope is that with the change for the individuals to do it, that eventually banks and credit unions get to stop. But we can continue to dream.
Yes. I just want you guys to remember what I said at the very beginning, that what's true today might not be true tomorrow. A lot of what we're saying is not as vulnerable to what we cover today is not as vulnerable to the wish-washiness that's happening in some areas of the government, right? But just about, I guess, a little over a week ago, Trump came out and said that he has the authority, along with his attorney general, to interpret laws, that the courts should not be a part of that at all. So just remember, that's not true. Executive orders don't equal laws. They're all of what he's trying to do that is undoing of a lot of departments and a lot of this he can't just do on his own. And they are being challenged in the court of law. Now, whether or not they care about it being challenged, they're probably going to do what they want to do anyway, just knowing their just history showing us that that's true. We're seeing that there's actually read this morning, it was a judge, it had to do with USAID, so nothing to do with banking, but they were told to disperse the funds and they just aren't doing it like they're told. And so the judge is going on, is on it, but they don't care. They're just doing what they want to do anyway. So if that were to hold true, just know that even if things are challenged in court, they may do what they want to do anyway. But Republicans have full control of Congress. They can basically pass any law that Trump wants relatively quickly. So it's good to stay abreast of what's going on. It's exhausting to stay abreast of what's going on, to be frank. That's why it's good to attend webinars like this, and we'll continue to try to, in our newsletters and whatnot, give you the information you need that's pertinent to what you do at work. But just stay abreast. Don't become complacent. Pay attention, because the chaos that's happening at that level, it can make you just be like, I can't pay attention to this for my own mental health. And I get that, I'm that way too, but it's important for you to pay attention so that you know what a part of your life could be affected, and where there's good times to reach out to your representatives and your banking, like ICBA and places like that, to express your concerns, especially in this space, so that, you know, we can make sure that we're protected as community financial institution bankers, because we play such an integral part of our own local economies. Anything to add, Ryan?
Nope, couldn't have said it better myself. I think there's going to be a lot of potential changes. It's a matter of knowing what is coming down the pipeline and what actually sticks, which a lot of it won't. So.
All right, that brings us to another poll question for y'all. This should be coming up on your screen now. And this, we want to get a little bit of a feel for how you're feeling, what's your mentality and your institution's approach to compliance risk under the new administration. 4 options there. And that can be anything from conservative, maybe just staying extra cautious, but being proactive, maybe try to be a little bit more balanced. You're adjusting, but not overreacting. Opportunistic, maybe you're willing to take a little bit more risk. Or again, we've always got that unsure option. We're just waiting to see how things play out and develop here. We'll give you all just another second. All right, wow, it seems like this is the most lopsided poll that we've had so far, with 75% of our audience saying that they are staying balanced, they're adjusting as needed, but not overreacting. Only 8% conservative, 2% optimistic, 15% are unsure, kind of sitting on the fence waiting to see how things develop. Kristen, does this surprise you at all?
No, I think that's logical. You know, having knee-jerk reactions to scenario, it doesn't seem logical at this time, because again, a lot of what's happened has already been reversed, or, you know, varying things like that. So it's good just to kind of like keep a level head, stay calm, pay attention, let the experts, let the people kind of like guide, and don't get lost in the chaos again. You know, just methodically think through things. And that leads us to, who should I listen to? You know, through the chaos, there's always going to be, you know, who do you ultimately report to as an institution? Your regulators. Use your regulators to get in and, you know, help them, let you guide you. If you're like, I am so lost in what everything is happening, this is what my institution's going through, can you help me understand this? Your regulators 9 times out of 10 want to be your partner in helping you have a good, safe, and sound institution. So listen to your regulators, listen to them, because they're ultimately the ones who are hearing the chaos, digesting it, and then making it actual items, so they can help you get ahead of things if things were to change. Ryan?
I like that. I like the regulators. That works for me. And obviously your mother, your boss. There's 2 very critical people to listen to. So I think you got
That's
it.
right. Thank y'all so much for that. Now we are getting into our Q&A. So, but before we do that, we've got our final poll question that's coming up on the screen now. And this is just going to ask if you want to get in touch with Risk Scout about any of the following. You can select as many or as few options as you'd like. We'll keep this question up for a minute as we kick off our Q&A. And as a reminder, you can submit any of those questions that you may have in the answered questions section of the GoToWebinar panel on the right side of your screen. I know we have a limited time here today, so if we don't have the chance to be able to answer your question live here on the call today, then we're happy to follow up with y'all individually, have some of our experts like Ryan and Kristen reach out and make sure that y'all are getting the responses that you need. We did have a couple good questions come through, and so I'll go ahead and send those y'all's way. One of those questions asked, since we are seeing a reduction in the amount of our regulatory bodies like the CFPB, OCC, what are the chances that these federal agencies will start to defer over to the states in terms of regulating financial institutions, and what might that look like? Ryan, I know as a former regulator, let me ask that question to you.
Yeah, I don't really see that happening. A lot of times right now, for example, like if the bank is well, yeah, so this would be a bank for the OCC example, but If the bank is regulated by the OCC, the Fed, the state, the FDIC, they're just looking at the OCC examination. And then when you look historically, what's happened with federal regulation and consolidation there, like the OTS was merged into the OCC. And all that did was change where the regulation was happening from at a federal level. And given we have a national banking system and a federal system of commerce in the US, it would be very difficult for everything to flip back over to the state, especially with how a lot of the laws are written, which makes some significant differences between national banks and state chartered banks. So I wouldn't see it going all the way back to the state, but we might see some changes in consolidation on which regulators are doing things. So like, for example, if the FDIC examiners were rolled up under the OCC, I think that was one discussion that's been floated out there by the administration. All that does is change who federally is performing the investigation rather than moving it to the state or a different governing body.
Excellent. Well said. Now, before we do close out today, I know we've had a lot of great conversations, but the team here at RiskOut wants to invite you to take the BS out of BSA by requesting a demo of our comprehensive BSA solution. Our team of former regulators like Ryan, BSA officers like Kristen, and fintech professionals have built this solution to provide an affordable and effective alternative to the solutions on the market today. We're excited to show you how we can help you optimize your AML program. So for a limited time, we are offering our infamous taking the BS out of BSA t-shirts to anyone that does schedule a demo with our team. So we will have a survey that will pop up after today's webinar. If you select that option, hop on that call with us. We will be sure to send you some awesome swag directly to your mailbox. Now, that is all of the time that we have for today. I do want to extend a big thank you to Kristen and Ryan for sharing their expertise with us. I know how much of a beast it was to go through all these articles, to keep up with all the news, and we are incredibly grateful for their time and patience with sharing this information with us. So thank you very much for that. For our attendees, keep an eye on your inbox. We will be sending out the recording, the slides, and all of the resources from today's session. They will hit your inbox tomorrow morning for your convenience. And again, there will be a brief survey following today's webinar. We ask you for some feedback there, how we did today. Maybe if you have any requests for future webinars, it's a great place to let us know. So please take a moment and share your thoughts there. Now, as always, if you do have any additional questions, if you want to learn a little bit more about RiskOut, or if you're just lonely and you want to come by and say hi, you can always visit us at riskout.com. We hope to see you on our next webinar. We hope you have a great rest of your day. And thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Thanks for joining, everyone.